Okay, it is the weekly Roundup American Prospect. I'm Dayen, executive editor. With me today, managing editor Ryan Cooper. Ryan, how are you?
Doing well, doing well. Nice and backlit until I got a
Yeah,
streaming setup here going.
I can see that. Your witness protection program adjacent right now. But we'll imagine your face. Look, we had some developments since the last weekly roundup. We had an election on Tuesday. Donald Trump was elected president for the second time. The U.S. Senate is now in the hands of the Republicans with likely 53 votes. The House is still up in the air, and we'll probably get to that at some point. But to start here, you know, I think there are a number of stories you could tell about this election. Uh, and Ryan, I want to get your input here first. Um, it seems to me that anytime you have a race that is basically decided by a couple of percentage points, you can blow up any little subgroup, um, any issue that you want and say that caused this. That's the secret sauce that we need to do. We just reverse that. Um, but the reality, I think, is that there was a uniform swing across the entire country, and it aligns very much with what would be expected given the approval rating of the president, the current president, and what has been demonstrated internationally, right? So maybe I'll use that as a launching point for you, and you go ahead.
Yeah, of anything sort of economic, I think you can really conclude that ordinary voters really, really hate inflation. Um, and I think that you can sort of break out like the people who are mechanically harmed the worst by inflation, like people on fixed incomes, people who haven't been able to get raises. Um, Trump, didn't do all that well among that group of people. It's not a mechanical relationship, I guess I would say. I think that
Right.
people view inflation as morally wrong, that they're being ripped off often enough correctly, even though you can point to a lot of broader structural stuff that the bulk of it comes out of the pandemic and the supply chain crunch.
Right.
It happened everywhere. It wasn't really Biden's fault. And the extent to which the stimulus package in 2021 fueled inflation, it also gave us an incredibly strong economy, which has pushed wages up. But I think it's just people are going to the grocery store or they're going to McDonald's or whatever, and they're like, "Oh, geez, this is so expensive," and that's pretty much as far as it goes. And higher income people whose wages have well outstripped the increase in prices have the same reaction. Um,
Right.
so that
I think there's a corollary to that, and it's if we want to break it down on a simple level, the idea is something's going wrong, something's out of control. Is government helping me? Right. So in 2020, we had this huge shock, this huge scarring event, and a bunch of policies were put in place to help people. Now, a lot of those were negotiated by Democrats, but they were signed by Trump. At least the initial round of this was signed by Trump. We had a piece about canvassing in Philadelphia in low propensity voter areas where they were saying that they thought Trump, helped them a lot because his name was on the checks, the stimulus checks that were given to them in 2020, right? So that is one half of it. And then all of those supports, pretty much right at the time that inflation starts to get going, are they go away. And they go away because they were temporary and they were tied to the pandemic, which was wrapping up, even though the inflation post pandemic was just starting to get rolling. And so think of it from the perspective of a not very engaged voter. Uh, there was a problem. Trump, by virtue of his name on the check, helped me. And then that entire safety net was taken away, and Joe Biden was president at that time. I'm not giving agency to either of these presidents in terms of why these things happen. But I'm saying the sequence of events is that we had this huge pop-up safety net that was entirely dissipated, and it was entirely dissipated under Joe Biden. And it happened right at the same time that it became more costly to live. So,
Yeah.
what would you think about that if you were, just a normal schmo?
Yeah, and I think it's fair to say that we couldn't have kept doing, these big checks like, every couple of months. Like that probably would have driven inflation way too high.
Right.
But we could have done,
I'm not saying it's rational.
yeah.
I'm not saying it's rational.
There were opportunities there, and Democrats did try to do some things. They did get through a massive economic restructuring plan, but that takes like years, if not decades, to fully like work itself out. And the benefits are only just now starting to be perceived. And
This is a very important point, and
we could
let's sit
have
on it for a second.
we had for the first time like a sort of functioning national unemployment insurance system, and a whole bunch of people were just allowed to stay on Medicaid. The states weren't allowed to kick people off, and then we just got rid of that. Those could have been, but if
Yeah,
not Joe Manchin. But to your point, the way that the American government like diffuses responsibility and the number of veto points that there are in the system, it's not. If it were a parliament, it would be much easier to figure out. You'd be like, okay,
right.
ruling coalition is responsible, blame them, throw the bums out or whatever. But
Well, and that also speaks to messaging. We have a good question in the chat that I want to get to in a second, but a perfect example is the child tax credit, right?
yeah,
So overnight, child poverty is cut in half because we're sending out $300 checks, or more, depending on the makeup of your household and the ages and everything. We're sending out these checks, and uh, we can talk about the fact that they were sent out in a way that was probably inefficient because it didn't get to everybody because it wasn't done through the Social Security Administration, it was done through the IRS. But that's a little wonky. Let's just stick to the facts here.
yeah.
People only got 6 checks. The whole thing didn't get up and running until July 2021. It ended at the end of 2021. In 2022, in their taxes, they got a bit of a boost. But the idea of getting a check to help you with your needs was only a 6-month proposition. And Democrats had this fantastical idea that people would intuit, because they weren't really being told, that they would intuit that these 6 checks were foundational to their lives, and they were going to fight in that narrow period because they were going to go away in the 7th month. Like, why would anyone think that would be a takeaway that poor mother of 2 who doesn't follow the news would get from that? Like, there was no kind of organizing principle. There was just this idea that through osmosis, people would be so grateful for this check that kind of looked, because it was coming off all these other stimulus checks, it kind of just looked like an extension of those, that temporary relief. It was coded as temporary. Why would they think that they could preserve that if that the system would just make it impossible for Congress to not preserve that? I think it's absolutely insane. It speaks to a broader messaging problem.
Yeah, messaging. And yeah, I believe I pointed out at the time that it was just a grave tactical error to not make the child tax credit expansion permanent when it was first passed in the stimulus pack. They thought, oh, if they did it once and it it's popular, then we will be able to do it again. But Because
Right.
like they say, welfare is sticky. Like that historically, there's a lot of research on this. Once a benefit is in place, it's very difficult to take it away. Like conservatives in
Right,
us.
but they go in place permanently.
Yeah,
Like all of those things that have been difficult to take away were permanent programs, food
exactly.
stamps, Medicaid, Obamacare. You
Yeah,
don't put it in temporarily and expect it to be made permanent. Like it's just insane logic.
yeah. Conservatives will struggle to get the votes to repeal Medicare, but if Medicare expired on its own and they didn't have to do anything, then they would have a much easier time. Especially,
That's that's the truism of the system.
yeah,
Is that osmosis is what sets in and inertia. Like the biggest hit to the safety net that we're going to see is next year when the premium support for Obamacare exchanges gets cut significantly. Because once again, Democrats did a temporary 2 year addition of to boost those subsidies in the Inflation Reduction Act. It's going to end at the end of 2025, and there's look. I mean, is there any hope that that's going to be retained? We should talk about the House picture, but maybe if Democrats get the House, that's the price they pay for agreeing to the tax cuts or something. But I doubt it. I mean, it's very easy for that to just lapse. So yeah, I mean, let's while we're on the topic of messaging, let's get this question from Rebecca first. People aren't listening to the people we listen to or reading what we read. Thank you for being a reader, by the way. Is it time to go head to head with people like Joe Rogan? And I think that one of the messages that we're going to see coming out of this is that young men are getting they're tuning out traditional media, they're tuning out broadcast media, and they're turning to streamers, they're turning to podcasters, they're turning to people like Joe Rogan, and we need a liberal Rogan to counteract that. Much like we needed a liberal talk radio station in 2004. I think there's going to be money around this. I think there's going to be foundation grants put to creating that liberal podcast network or liberal streaming network, and I think it's going to be absolutely ghastly. I think because it's going to put the objective. It's too cloying. Like they're putting an objective. How do we win back these people over just producing something that has a certain set of beliefs or value system or principle or anything like that? What do you think?
yeah. I mean, if I were to guess what the product coming out of a bunch of foundations and big money donors would look like, yeah, it would be a terrible. It's funny you were joking. Listeners may not have
Yeah,
heard
maybe not.
that Air America was a real liberal talk radio thing. Like Sam Cedar was involved, and I believe it
Mm-hmm.
actually did rather well in terms of radio, but they had consistent money problems, and it was managed pretty badly and eventually collapsed. Al
Well, I mean, the other part of that is it was on top of a Clear Channel, which was a conservative network, and that network barred ads from being delivered to Air America. It only delivered those ads to the right wing talk radio networks. Obviously, the architecture of where you place this stuff is also important.
Yeah. That said, though, I don't think that there's ways of this that I think you could be a lot more intelligent about it and not just have, a bunch of consultants basically just evaporate money creating podcasts that nobody listens to. Um, I think like the idea that makes the most sense to me intuitively, at least, would be to just set up some regular um, local news type of publications in places that have been just have turned into news deserts, like Northeast Pennsylvania, where I live. Um,
Right.
you pick up the local paper, and it's got some good coverage, but half of it is like Associated Press rewrites or reprints rather. And it's private equity, Alden Global Capital bought up all the papers in the Valley, the Wyoming Valley, and fired like half the staff, and they're just circling the drain like everywhere else. If you were to set up something that was just straightforward, mostly just reportage, and then you had just, progressive type of editorial, slant basically in terms of the opinion columns and whatnot, I think that could have a pretty good, pretty good result, pretty good money for dollar. Kate Riga pointed out on Talking Points memo that an interesting data point is that where Harris campaigned the most in the swing states, she actually did better. And you would think that makes sense, but the converse didn't happen. So like Trump, where Trump was also campaigning in the swing states for the most part, and yet he had huge swings towards him in places like New York City or California, where ISIS.
Both places he campaigned, by the way, where she didn't. But I want to push back on that a little bit, and then continue this thought. That story about Harris doing better in the states that she actually contested. First of all, like, yeah, I mean, when you do $1 billion marketing campaign, yeah, it might inspire some more help. But two, it's largely a Wisconsin story. Actually, there's an outsized part of that swing is in Wisconsin, and we're going to have a DNC race here in a while. And I'm throwing Ben Wickler's hat into the ring because Wisconsin has figured out how to use money effectively, how to in a state whose demographics is really more Iowa and the Dakotas, to have. They made significant gains, some of it obviously because they redistricted in the state legislature, but they've poised themselves to actually win the state legislature in 2026. Tammy Baldwin was able to win despite the top of the ticket. And Harris, the swing was most muted in Wisconsin. So, I would say that that's pulling the average. It's a small sample size, right? 7 states. The average is being pulled by Wisconsin a little bit. The change relative to the swing in places like North Carolina and Michigan was like 1 point. So anyway, moving on from that. But you wrote a thing this week about the Democratic Party really trying to deal with the information environment. Talk about that.
Yeah, I mean, back in the day, in the 19th century, newspapers are almost all explicitly partisan. The political parties in this country were founded on newspapers. And yeah, I just think that the way Democrats spent like $5 billion on this election and all of their associated super PACs and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
And most of that is doing comms, or a very large part of it. It's advertising.
I think most of that was annoying me on my phone.
Yes. $5 billion to send 5 billion text messages to David.
Right. It's $1 a message.
But yeah, the communication, outreach, but they do it only during the campaign, so you have this like 6 months to a year-ish time when you just like send people through these peculiar ways of reaching them, mailers and phone calls and text messages and TV advertisements. And it comes to a crescendo that bids up the price of all of that stuff, especially TV ads, just producing mega profits for these, local television stations. And then at the end of that, it all goes away. And nobody's hearing about the Democratic Party identity or brand or what programs they want to do for another, 2 years until the next campaign starts up again. And, if you just had some institutional, just build some permanent stuff, more or less just doing what campaigns do, trying to communicate with people, to tell propaganda, this is like the basics of politics going back thousands of years.
What you're saying proceeds from the assumption that you're saying that the way campaigns are run by the Democratic Party proceeds from the assumption that politics is about one day every 2 years. And the truth is that politics is an ongoing process that doesn't take a breath after an election day. And if that was articulated better and manifested better, then we'd be in a better position, because part of the reason why slander kind of works well, part of the reason why Republican lies kind of work well, is that they have an apparatus to deliver those 365 days a year, right? Not just it's not just something that they come up with. It's not a product they put out for 2 months. That's a pop-up product that has, it's similar to what we were talking about with the pop-up safety net, right? Like, there's this short-termism, and Biden, to his credit, actually, had a bit of a long-term vision in terms of industrial policy and in terms of some of the supports they gave to industrial manufacturing and clean energy. But the time horizons are so long. Like I am incensed by this idea that the election proved that delivering people good things doesn't matter. And it's like, what planet are you on, dude? Like not only is what we just talked about, where we had a pop-up safety net that went away under Biden, but right now we're in the midst of a manufacturing construction boom. Construction created by itinerant workers, not an actual manufacturing boom, not something that creates permanent jobs and permanent community. They're the example of the Medicare price negotiation for prescription drugs, which I think is a perfect example. We did it, but the actual lower prices don't kick in until 2026, when Donald Trump is going to take credit for them. It's just an insane way of doing business. And so some of that is out of necessity, because it just takes time to build a factory. And some of that is malpractice politically. And so I don't think you can credibly make the case that people felt this great set of benefits from the government, because you have to overlay it with this cost of living crisis, and you have to overlay that with this kicking out of these pandemic supports. So we have a bunch of questions in the chat that I think I want to get to. Maybe we'll just answer a bunch of questions here. So we'll start with Steve. Please clarify the distribution of stimulus checks. Which administration approved and distributed which checks? Did Biden get blamed for inflation caused by the stimulus checks? Ryan, why don't you take that one?
So there were, I think, 3 rounds of checks? Yeah. So you had the first one, which was right as the pandemic got started, in the CARES Act. And that's
like March of 2020, April 2020, something like that.
That was $1,200, if I remember correctly. And so Trump signed that, though it was a Democratic Party idea, because remember, Democrats had the House at that point.
And Senate.
And then let's see, after the election.
Oh, no, I'm sorry. They just had the House. You're right.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
After the election in 2020, there was another $600 that just came. That one was just Trump's idea out of the blue, as I recall. Because he just was basically, you had the Georgia Senate's like runoff elections coming up in January, and so he was trying to bribe people, and it didn't work. And then during that campaign, the Biden said, well, if we win this seat, then we'll give you we'll give you a $2,000 check. And the way they sort of interpreted that, there was some dispute about this that I think was kind of stupid at the time. But they did another $1,400 so that it was $2,000. So that was the third one that came as part of the American Rescue Plan in March.
And as far as did this cause inflation, let's pick up that part. To say that it did, you would have to ignore the fact that the exact same inflation happened all around the world, including in places with vastly different circumstances, vastly different federal spending regimes, and so on. I think our reporting through the years has made pretty clear that the pandemic created supply chain crunches that led to the inflationary episode. And when those supply chain crunches eased, the inflation came back down. And, the timing of it doesn't make sense because most of the run up in inflation is in 2022. It was like 18 months or so after the last stimulus check that ever came out. There are so many reasons why this idea put forward by people like Larry Summers that U.S. spending created this inflationary environment, maybe to a very small degree, but not the primary factor, I think, in any way.
Yeah.
And that is proven by the fact that, what the Larry Summers' claim was that we're now going to have to massively raise unemployment levels in order to get us back to a position of low inflation. And that did not have to happen at all. And in fact, it didn't happen. We're in a position now where we're pretty much at target at 2%. And we have, low unemployment.
Yeah, and I just want to add on that a little bit. I think it's fair to conclude that, the stimulus more broadly, because it was much more than only the checks. It probably did
Right.
increase inflation a little bit, but the flip side of that is, unlike almost every other country in the world, especially Europe, what we did in the US is we kind of busted through inflation with more production. Mike Conzel at the Roosevelt Institute had a neat way of looking at this, looking at whether he broke things into a bunch of different categories of goods and said
Right.
if as inflation comes down, are people buying more or less? So is it like people don't have money and they're pulling spending back, and so prices aren't rising so quickly, or are they buying even more and prices are coming down too? And it's more or less the latter situation. So insofar as the stimulus did that, it also had a disinflationary effect by allowing us to bust through the supply bottleneck with more production. And so
And
there was,
also implicit in that whole idea that we shouldn't have spent too much is the idea that what we, you know, if you play that out logically, what you're saying is we should have locked people in their homes and let them starve to death. What would you have the government do at that point if it's unsafe for people to be mingling about together, and we have to lock everybody down? Then, anyway, I'm moving on. Okay, we got a question from Mike. Is this an opportune time for a split in the Democratic Party and founding a new left center party? It would be an exceedingly inopportune time to do that, given our current political structure, which devalues any splintering of that nature. Am I
yeah.
saying anything you don't know, Ryan?
The thing you got to realize about the United States is that, unlike any other democracy, it is formally a two-party state. Third parties are
Yeah.
de facto illegal. Democrats and Republicans are part of the government. That's why we have state-run primaries and stuff. That's a completely bizarre thing that doesn't exist in any other
Right.
democracy. And the legal barriers to third party entry are so high that even the ones that try, they spend all their money being harassed, with all the signature collection requirements and stuff. And then they get sued all the time, to get them kicked off the ballot. It's pointless. Bernie Sanders had the right idea in 2016, and it almost works.
Well, and you could say Donald Trump has the right idea, right? I mean, a lot of Donald Trump's philosophies contrast pretty widely, even though he governed kind of as a run-of-the-mill Republican, and he probably will again. His ideas on tariffs, his ideas on various other things contrast with the Republican Party. But so he just went in and took it over, and did so very successfully. And there's no reason why that can't be done on the Democratic side. Okay, another question here from Mark. Should we focus on economic populist solutions and jettison identity politics? There are lots of BLM marches. Should we organize working class marches? This is a subject that has gotten, I think, a lot of talk, mostly from members of the political class, really kind of saying, our problem is we're getting bullied around by the left around defunding the police or trans issues or this and that and the other thing, when none of that actually was present, certainly not in Kamala Harris's campaign, which was arguably on the right in terms of many of these policing issues and immigration issues and things like that, and wasn't a part of really anybody else's campaign. But it's basically believing the lies being told by the right about the left. There's, I think people are sort of misreading how Democrats actually ran in this election. But to the extent that should there be working class marches, yeah, they're called strikes. Some of them are. The problem is that one of the fascinating parts of the exit poll is that unions held with Harris, and actually they were more in the direction of Harris than even Biden got in 2020. However, unions are not the working class because we've made unions fairly illegal in this country. Union membership is 10% of the overall workforce, which means that 90% of the working class is not in a union. And so, one lesson you could take from that is you need more unions. And while federal law plays a major role in that, so does union organizing. And we've seen really very low levels of union organizing historically over the last decade or more. What do you think of that?
Yeah. Yeah, that to bring it back to our previous discussion, unions are one of those big funders, and every year they spend, hundreds of millions of dollars on campaigning for Democrats, which is fair enough, given the legal implications, but they spend comparatively less on trying to do mass organizing of new workers. Yeah, I don't, it's like going back on this sort of woke, anti-woke thing. I think it's a mistake to pay too much attention to it. It's like you sort of like I've seen a number of people who are at least sort of on the, sane-ish, and then you get on this transphobia stuff and your brain just turns to soup. I don't think there's any contradiction between economic populism and identity politics per se. Donald Trump is nothing but white identity politics. I think that one can criticize, I think, a certain academic, hyper abstract sort of version of identity politics that can be unhelpful.
Mm-hmm.
There was some research on the term Latinx or Latinx or whatever, and that's a totally marginal thing, but it got a disproportionate amount of attention, and Latinos themselves say they find it really obnoxious, and just as a term, it's incredibly unwieldy.
Yeah.
So there is that sort of thing, but I don't, to even suggest something like, well, we need to stop focusing on like identity politics. Is that civil rights? I think it would just be undermining our own coalition at that point.
Yeah. It's an issue that I think is going to be front and center and come up more and more in these debates as election losses often occasion a slide into factionalism and recrimination, and there's certainly no shortage of that over the last few days. I think that's going to be a big part of it, and I think I think there are people out there that have understood the way to talk about this, and we need to listen to them more. We have one last question, and by the way, thank you for the question and keep them coming. Question from Constance: how should individuals protect free speech and new Americans from the coming repression? So, I mean, this is maybe a good segue into what do we expect to happen in a Trump second term, and then what can be done about it. So, the Trump is somebody who has said he would make life harsh for his political enemies, maybe round them up, maybe just sort of do things that silence them. Obviously, I think the number one and biggest expectation is a mass deportation program. Um, the stocks, I did a little thing, it's on the site right now, prospect.org, about what were the biggest gaining stocks this week. And crypto, you would expect, Coinbase was gained like 41% this week because they bought the government successfully. There was a fintech called Money Lion that is under a huge amount of Consumer Financial Protection Bureau and Securities and Exchange Commission scrutiny, and obviously there's going to be a lot of deregulation. Those agencies are going to be gutted, and so a company like Money Lion that is just scamming people, they're going to benefit. But then the other one was Core Civic and Geo Group, whose stocks have gone up 60 to 70% this week. And those are private prison companies. And they are the contractors essentially for ICE, the Immigration and Customs Enforcement. And if you're running a mass deportation program, even though Donald Trump implausibly said it would have no price tag, you don't have to spend any money to massively move around millions of people from this country to a different one. Obviously, that's going to cost money, and that money is going to be funneled to these contractors. So what can be done about that? It's going to be interesting if we see civil disobedience around that. I think our organization and many other organizations need to move forward without fear or favor and tell the truth and let chips fall. And I think a lot are committed to doing that. I think some that are billionaire owned may not be committed to doing that. What do you think of this question?
Yeah, it's a tricky one. I think there's only so much an individual can do. But certainly I think there's going to be an opportunity when/if Trump does start going hog wild. Because I've been reading, a bunch of reporting, basically talking to Trump voters around the country, especially in blue states. I saw some testimonies from in New York City in the Bronx, one of the poorest places in the country. And I saw some testimony from a canvasser in Hawaii, where he's talking to a number of like native Hawaiian Trump people. And that's a depressing thing to think about. But almost universally was they don't believe he's going to do that. There's like people, unauthorized immigrants who are like, I would have voted for Trump if I could. He's not going to deport me. I'm one of the good ones.
Yeah.
This like going back to the media thing again, people just don't believe that he's going to do all of this heinous stuff that he's promised to do over and over again. And I think when he starts, it's going to be like there was back in his first term when he started doing the deportation and child separation stuff. This time the chair of his transition team says they're just going to deport whole families because tons and tons of mixed families from people who came over and then had their kids here, and so their kids are citizens. And if that happens, I think that a lot of people are going to be shocked, which is frustrating in a sense because like he told you he's going to do it, but that's going to be an opportunity, I think, to really raise a stink about this and use the legal strategies and mass protest and reporting to get Trump to back off, to confront him in any way that is available.
I think the other thing, Bob Kuttner did a piece that's on the site today about, how Trump's favored policies will intersect with inflation, which was seen, as we said at the top, as one of the, if not the biggest factor in the election. If you mass deport large numbers of immigrants, you're going to be inevitably creating labor scarcity in areas like construction and other forms of retail and areas where you're going to have to bid up workers, and that might be good for some remaining members of the working class, but their wages probably aren't going to go up at the same rate that prices are going to go up because those costs are going to be passed on. Similarly, if you do the broad across the board tariffs, including on goods that can't be reshored into the United States, like bananas or whatever, you're going to occasion a large increase in prices on imported goods. And these aren't the only two ways. Bob mentions, go read the piece, prospect.org, many other ways in which Trump's policies are likely to create inflation. And the one of the things that could be an effect of that we saw be really of a negative effect in this presidency was the Federal Reserve's response was to bid up, raise interest rates significantly, which increases the cost of borrowing on things like mortgages and things like auto loans. And it certainly doesn't seem like Trump has much of a supply side theory of the case. We have this tremendous housing shortage, and he says, these changes to zoning are going to ruin the suburbs. So I don't think that there's going to be any kind of housing supply investment, and so that shortage will continue, and the price of rent or home buying is still going to remain high. So you put all that together, and people said, I hate inflation, and I'm going to vote for Trump because he's not Joe Biden. They might get some more inflation under Donald Trump and have to deal with those consequences. The reality is that if you look at the last 10 elections in America, and I'm including midterms in that, 9 of those 10 elections have either changed the presidency or changed one, if not both, chambers of Congress. This one is no exception, and it might change all 3. We can get into the House scenario here in a second, but basically, it's kind of been a tennis match for the last 20 years in American life. Problems aren't being solved, and so voters volley the ball to the next party. Let's see if they can do something about it. No, we're going to volley it back to the other party. Let's see if they can do something about it. No, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. 9 of the last 10 elections, only 2012, where Mitt Romney had a winnable race, but Barack Obama successfully painted him as a private equity firm in human form and won the race. 9 out of the last 10 elections, there has been this ping pong match because people aren't getting satisfaction that their needs and desires are being met by the political system. Some of that's because of veto points and gridlock. Some of that is because no political party has credibly offered answers to the people that they could implement.
Yeah. And that illustrates an important point, which is that the upcoming midterm elections, I think, are going to be very important. It would have been better to defeat Trump, but the system is not yet rigged. This is not like Hungary, where it's a national election system. Elections are all by the states, and those rules vary a lot. And thanks to Democrats winning past elections and hanging on in some races this time, Democrats, have state legislatures or they have governors in place. So Trump will find it very difficult to rig the entire election. It takes quite a number of years, even in, Nazi Germany and fascist Italy. Italy, especially, it took many years for Mussolini to fully rig the electoral system. And so, if we can build on any kind of backlash there might be to Trump going crazy with deportations or tariffs or whatnot, then, we could get a lot of good people in place to block him being able to rig the system in 2028.
Or in 2024. So let's just briefly go over the math here. Democrats are not out of it in the House of Representatives. And it basically comes down to the states where a lot of votes have yet to be counted. It's 3 states in particular: Arizona, Alaska, and California. There are 7 races in those 3 states which have not been called. And broadly speaking, if Democrats win 6 of those 7, they would have a bare 218 vote majority. provided that they hold all the other races that are uncalled, where they're currently leading. Alaska has instant runoff voting. Mary Peltola is down about 4 points to Nick Begich. However, the rural vote has not come in Alaska. It's literally like brought in bush planes, that rural vote, and it's largely native and usually very Democratic. And so there is a fighter's chance that Peltola is going to pull that one out. In Arizona, there's one race that has gone back and forth 2 or 3 times already. It's right now a 200 vote spread between Kirsten Engel. This is the 6th district in Arizona, against a guy named Juan Ciscomani. That race is going to be neck and neck and back and forth throughout. And then you have 5 races in California that are all within 4 points. And that sounds like they're not going to win 5 races that are all within 4 points. Well, the typical thing that happens in California, and I say this as a Californian, is that there's a blue shift on those late arriving mail-in ballots. Everybody in California gets a mail-in ballot, and as long as it's postmarked by Election Day, which was Tuesday, it can arrive as late as next Tuesday. So there are ballots that are not yet at the voting sites that will be counted in this election. There are upwards of 4 million and maybe 5 million uncounted ballots in California. This is why it makes me insane to talk about turnout. This happens every time, every 2 years. They talk about turnout in the election without noticing the 5 million ballots that haven't been counted in California. So that means about 100,000 or so per congressional district. That's easily enough. I mean, it's not even, but my point is that there are enough ballots in those 5 uncalled races, which have narrow advantages for the Republican now, to flip all of them. And I think 2 of them are most definitely going to flip, and the other 3 we'll see. So Democrats need to pull an inside straight. I wouldn't say they're the favorites. I would say maybe it's a 20% chance, maybe it's 25% chance. But if Democrats win the House, that is a massive change from a trifecta for the Republicans, particularly on the tax bill, which would give Democrats a seat at the table on that. So that's my pitch on that. And I wrote a piece that's on the site about all of that over at Prospect.org. We have a bunch of other questions that I want to get to. Ryan, I'm going to give you the first crack at this one. This is from Jared. What did either of you think of Sanders' statement, Bernie Sanders, versus Richie Torres's tweets? Hopefully you've seen both of those. And if you haven't, I'll pick it up.
I haven't seen Richie Torres's tweets. I have seen Bernie Sanders' statement, and all I'll say about that is one virtue of Bernie is he always is saying the same thing every time. You know, the great virtue in politics of repeating yourself, no matter the context. This is I'm getting my message out, and he does it every. It works.
Basically, this person says that Sanders was maybe more even-handed on the domestic economic stuff versus identity politics, whereas Torres was much more, we were the left with their defund the police thing is ruining America. I don't know who the left is in that context, in that equation, but it is something that I've definitely noticed from politicians. You saw Seth Moulton, who's in Massachusetts, say, I have 2 girls and I don't want them having to be in sports with a man. Or biological male, that's. I think there's going to be a strong strain of that in the party, trying to abandon or jettison or cut off or throw under the bus certain classes of people. I don't think that ever gets you really anywhere in the final analysis in politics, at least on the Democratic side. 2 more questions. So one from Jenny. How can we protect ourselves financially from inflation and decrease purchasing power parity and a devalued U.S. dollar if Trump abolishes the FDIC and implements his tariff policies? Abolish the FDIC. I have not. I've seen that pop up once or twice lately, and I don't know where it's coming from. Maybe that was buried inside Project 2025 or something. I don't recall that. And I would be extremely surprised if that was done. I mean, most of the names put out there for Treasury Secretary are like Wall Street guys. The FDIC was the greatest gift to people like David Sachs and the venture capitalists who all backed Trump after Silicon Valley Bank collapsed, and they decided to back the even though they had money well above the $250,000 limit for deposit insurance, they decided to back all that money. I don't know that the FDIC is going anywhere. I don't think it is. But what do you think more broadly about that? Like, how do you protect yourself from inflation? I mean,
definitely buy crypto. Crypto will say
crypto fixes it.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Crypto it's highly exposed to inflation. It's a crap stock kind of. But no, I mean, to a certain extent, there's the dollar is influenced to everything. I mean, you can buy certain like inflation protected securities, I believe, the tips.
Yeah.
But I think if you're looking for financial advice, like you really can't go wrong with your just sort of diversified portfolio, your classic mix of stocks and bonds and real estate and
certainly the stock market is surging on the expectations of essentially no regulators in the government and probably a lower corporate tax rate even than the meager amount that it is now. So you can't go wrong with that. I think the protection such that it is Democrats saying every day, you said you were stop inflation, here's more inflation. What's going on? To get Republicans to compensate and back down from these dangerous policies.
Oh yeah,
I have another question. Yeah, go ahead.
Real quick, I would say that unless and until Trump were to get rid of the FDIC, you don't worry about the banks. And if he were to propose that, it would be a 5-alarm fire, and all the richest donors in the entire country, they would be howling. And if Trump, if he's anything, he's easy to push around if you're a rich guy. So I would be highly skeptical of that happening.
Yeah. Last question here. Can Rollins in Coachella Valley really pull that off? I live in Palm Springs and there's much Rollins support. I am speaking to you from Palm Springs, California right now. Here's one of these. Will Rollins for Congress. That is going to be one of the difficult ones, actually. If you look at the 4 other races, and I'll specify them. There's the 13th district of California. It's a guy named Adam Gray, who's the Democrat. He's within like 3,000 votes. Dave Min in California 47. That's the open seat of Katie Porter's. He's within about 600 votes. That's likely to flip today. George Whiteside's in northern Los Angeles County, 27th district. He's within about a couple thousand votes. And then Michelle Steele is the Republican. Democrat is Derek Tran in Orange County. That's within 4 points, but it's like 9,000 votes. All of those other 4 races, as the late ballots have been coming in, they've all shifted to the Democrats. Rollins's race has, as the late ballots have been coming in, has been shifting a little bit to the Republicans. And that was also true 2 years ago. Rollins actually showed up 2 years ago. He ran as well in 2022. He showed up to orientation, and he was told during freshman orientation that you actually lost and you can go home now. That race was very close. This race is also close. It's just unclear where those ballots are going to come from. Because they only had to be postmarked. It's not like one precinct hasn't been counted. It's anyone in the entire district that put their ballot in the mail late is able to get it counted. So it's not like this is in the conservative area or this is in the liberal area. The one thing I've heard is that obviously the Democratic vote sink in this district is Palm Springs and the areas in the Coachella Valley. They're on the eastern side over the hill, or the western side, I should say, over the hill is more conservative. because Palm Springs has a lot of older voters, that you don't maybe get the profile of the late absentee ballots being younger voters, which are more democratic. Which, you know, it's like cramming for the test the night before the test and then putting it in the mail. So that's what we'll see about that. Okay, I have another question here from Jared. What do you think will happen to Harris's career? I foresee she'll either pull an Adlai in 28 or replace Newsom after 26. I don't know about you, but I don't agree with that. Kamala Harris does have an open 2026 Kamala Harris for governor of California account. Every politician in California kind of does that to keep their options open. But I would highly doubt that she would jump into that race. It just doesn't seem like an ambition of hers to run a state. And typically on the Democratic side, if your candidate loses a presidential election, you are not getting another chance. That's been historically. He has to go back to Stevenson in '56, but there's no other case of that in the ensuing close to 70 years. I just don't. I don't know what her career holds, but I don't see it being elective office.
Yeah, I would guess she ends up sort of like what Hillary Clinton's been doing, get a foundation and do some, philanthropy and stuff. And on the presidential point, I would strongly suspect that Democrats will be highly reluctant to nominate another woman again. That was
sadly probably yes, yeah.
This happened in 2020, and it was like practically the only argument for picking Biden is he's the white dude, the old white dude who seems kind of conservative, and it worked, or I
Turns
don't
out he wasn't that conservative, but
right.
yes, it did work.
He did win the election, and then we nominated a woman again, and she lost, and that pattern is going to be very fear, and I suspect that
Right.
Democrats, if there is an election in 2028, they're going to want to go again demographically with alas, I'm not necessarily convinced that Harris's gender had anything to do with anything, but it may be.
No, I don't think it
I
did.
bet enough people will conclude that better safe.
Right.
Sorry, let's get a
That makes it an upward battle for someone like a Gretchen Whitmer,
yeah.
To cut through that, or any others. I who is the leader of the Democratic Party? I think that is a key question. We don't have that answer right now. We don't have anything close to that answer. If the Democrats pull this inside straight and win the House, then Hakeem Jeffries will be the Speaker, and maybe you could have a pretension of him being the leader of the Democratic Party, but I don't really think so. I don't know who that is. I don't know where the party thinks it's going. I think it's sort of a disparate mass right now. And I think that's the key question that's going to need to be answered in the ensuing period here. As you say, provided that we have an electoral machinery, but I actually think we do. Anyway, any final thoughts on that?
Yeah. One thing that maybe gives me a little bit of hope, perhaps wishful thinking, is that the Trump people, they were all ready to do another coup, to put him in office. So you're going to try it. It was all, Trump was signaling he's going to claim victory, and then he won. He didn't need to, and so now he hasn't done the coup that would get rid of democracy. That he's going to have to try to do it again if he's still alive in 4 years. And so
Right.
kind of got a little bit of 4-year lease on life in a sense, possibly. We'll see how it works out, but yeah, we'll be fighting to serve it at the very least.
Well, look, whatever happens, we're going to be here. I sent out a letter to our readers just this week. Our job is to tell you who has power and what they're doing with it and why it matters to you. And we're not going to stop doing that, regardless of who holds that power and whatever threats they make or whatever. So business as usual here at the Prospect. We're going to be honest with you. We're not going to sugarcoat things. We're not going to say that things are in a better position than they are, but we're gonna tell you the truth and as we see it, and maybe talk about the best ways to fight back and get to a different place again. After 2004, there was this kind of similar vacuum in the Democratic Party. Who is the head of the Democratic Party? Nobody knew. And 2 years later, they won back the House and Senate, and in a huge landslide. And 2 years after that, the presidency. So these things tend to, as I said, 9 out of 10, they tend to whipsaw back and forth. So we'll see if that happens again. But Ryan Cooper, thank you for being here. Appreciate it. And we will be back next week with another edition of the Weekly Roundup. Thank you. And please visit prospect.org and check us out as we work through this together. All right. Thanks.
See you, everyone.